Now, you'll remember probably I had Shadow Affairs Minister, Cybersecurity Minister, Senator James Paterson on the program recently to discuss the Senate inquiry into foreign interference on social media that he organised. Well, today that inquiry has handed down its findings. And joining me now to discuss it all, Senator Paterson himself. Senator, thank you for your time. I know it's hectic there in Canberra. I'm pleased to talk to you as soon as that report has landed. First, tell us about the detail, your recommendations, but also your claims that the Chinese embassy made contact about this inquiry. They weren't happy it was happening in the first place.
Peter, you're right. It's hot off the presses, just tabled about an hour ago in the Senate, and thank you for your interest throughout the inquiry on these really important issues. You're right. The Chinese embassy made a complaint about the committee to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We then made representations to the Secretariat of the committee to find out whether or not we had the power or not to compel WeChat to appear before our committee or to answer our questions, given WeChat does not have any Australian presence. This is one of the very concerning developments during the inquiry, that these very influential global social media platforms who have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Australian users, have no physical, legal or personnel presence in Australia and therefore effectively fall outside the scope of a lot of our laws and regulations. That's why one of the recommendations we made in the committee report was that as a bare minimum, they must have an Australian presence so that in the future they are subject to the Parliament and our regulators and our courts.
All right, give me the thrust of your report.
The key principle behind this report, Peter, is that whether we like it or not, social media platforms are now the public square. They are where issues are debated, where news breaks, where decisions effectively are shaped and made. And foreign authoritarian states know that. And they're weaponising both Western headquartered social media platforms as well as those platforms they control more directly, like TikTok and WeChat, because they're based in countries like China. And so the health of these forums relates very closely to the health of our democracy, and we must fix that. The most important principle underlying the committee's report is transparency, not censorship. We believe that users of these platforms should be informed about how the platforms themselves conduct themselves and the content they interact with on the platforms. And that means we shouldn't have to censor any content on the platform in order to protect users, because they'll be better informed to make their own decisions about it.
Well, I'm going to pick up some of the stuff you're talking about now, and a related issue that was in the media this morning. Meta, this is the company that owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Google. They admit they're now hiring engineers and developers in China for most of their products, for mobile products, for smart home products. And, rightly we are concerned sometimes by these Chinese nationals in these big companies. But here in Australia, we've got the Albanese government pushing to give all of these same companies the power to censor social media content in this country that they deem, these social media companies, not government or an Australian entity, that they deem harmful to minorities. That's a concern.
That's right. Two really important issues there, Peter. I mean, one of our critiques of companies like WeChat and TikTok is that because they have China-based employees, the data that they have on their platforms are at risk. If Western social media platforms like Google and Meta are going to employ China-based employees, then they're opening themselves up to the same criticism and the same concern. So I'm worried about that. But I'm very proud that the Coalition today has said that we're going to oppose Labor's so-called misinformation and disinformation bill, because it is going to weaponise and turbocharge the censorship that already happens on those platforms, so that Australians' legitimate political speech is going to be silenced. And my colleague David Coleman was on your colleague Sherry Markson's show earlier, outlining our very deep and profound concerns about this and the way in which it could be manipulated for partisan political objectives and really threaten the freedom of speech rights of all Australians, which is our most fundamental freedom. So we will fight that bill to the very end.
I want to stay with this other issue of control and Beijing influence. Reports out of Britain suggest that Chinese officials will have the ability to remotely paralyse electric vehicles in other countries. Now, why does Beijing have those powers? What sort of threat does it pose? And how credible do you think these claims out of Britain are?
Peter, it sounds like something out of a movie. It sounds really far-fetched, but unfortunately it is plausible and it is possible. The reality is that most electric cars today are manufactured in China, and many of them are by Chinese-owned companies and controlled companies. They export them all around the world. And these are basically computers on wheels. They are internet-connected devices, And any internet-connected device made by a Chinese company can be ultimately controlled or is at risk of being controlled if it has cybersecurity vulnerabilities in Beijing. And those companies will do what the Chinese Communist Party tells them to because that's what Chinese law says they must do. And even if it wasn't written in Chinese law, that's what every Chinese business person understands if they want to continue to run their businesses. And so it is, unfortunately, yet another technology-enabled cybersecurity threat that we face. And as Western societies, we have to really step up to this threat and protect ourselves much better. Otherwise, if conflict did originate, particularly in the Indo-Pacific in the next 5 or 10 years, we would be leaving ourselves extraordinarily vulnerable to this kind of interference.
On that terrifying note, James Paterson, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. Thank you for your time this evening.